And we have heard a lot about patient centricity today, and probably that's what we want to wrap up today here on the stage. And what we want to start with is actually we want to define this word patient centricity. There are tons of conferences around it, tons of activities around it, and I just want to get a kind of a sense what you guys define as patient centricity, just to get kind of a boundaries of what we're talking about. Last year we had somebody introducing us to a video about oncology, a certain indication and patients and how their life is, and that was also kind of patient centricity. I just want to make a boundary and just understand what you think about it. So maybe we start with you, Thierry. What do you think is patient centric in this regard?
Yeah, thank you for the invite. So patient centricity seems to be, I would say, very normal behavior or normal mindset. But as Thomas said, when I started 30 years ago, thinking that you could interact with a patient would be completely foolish, because we were considering that there was a real wall, and I wouldn't say about Berlin Wall, but almost, that is to say, a different world, and only in the hands of the investigator. So there has been a shift, and the way I see it is to consider that, as my colleague from Amgen said, I think everyone working in R&D in pharma is really thinking that we can do something useful for the patient, and not only for our company. And therefore, patient centricity is trying to put, I would say, the patient expectation in our action. And despite we are in a very regulated environment, that is to say, before we were more thinking about what the regulators may think about what we do, we try now also to think what the patient may think about what we do. So that's the way we try to input that.
Like the explanation a lot, especially putting regulations kind of not aside, but at least trying to focus on the patient first and then see how that fits into regulations. I think is a good approach. Yeah. Lisa.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, first of all, because it has really become a buzzword, right? It's really
Absolutely.
Popular to talk about patient centricity. When I think about it as not a specific action, not a specific initiative we're doing, but I really think it's a way of thinking, it's a way of believing, it's a way of acting. And I think we should also see it as a partnership, really, between the sponsors, the sites, and patients and their caregivers. Because through this partnership, you can really try to develop the best possible outcomes and also experience along the way. So I think it's more. My message is that I don't think it's just to come with an example of we're doing this app, whatever. I think it's the whole mindset, actually, and the way we behave.
Pretty much what Christophe said at the beginning, where
exactly.
he said, you can't really say, now we are patient-centric.
Yeah.
It has to be in your DNA, kind of. Okay. Yeah. Tom, same question to you. What do you define as patient-centric, man?
Well, I got a bit concerned, having worked in patient recruitment for such a long time, and thought I scared all the patients away when they left just before this piece.
We told you we're coming.
Well, we're a funny industry. When you think of it, we're the highest regulated industry in the world, much higher than the arms trade or the finance or the banking or anything like that. So, so we work, and we're a mindset of people who work in detail and process. And historically, you have to look at the evolution. So look at the stakeholders for pharma research. GPs, then it was hospitals, then it was patient advocacy. So patient advocacy, like Lisa said, I don't think it's just a buzzword anymore. It's actually stuck. And when you think, a lot of our thinking is in the back office. So for example, if you take e-consent, what was the original premise for e-consent to help? Was it to help the patient, or was it to help the people in the back office who could do source data verification of the consent process at their desk? So I think what's happening, and like Lisa said, it's an evolution. It is actually sitting up, and that's 6 degrees of separation out to the patient, saying, well, we better include the patient in this, or we better include the patient insight of the patient burden analysis. So I think it's a realization collectively across the industry that we have to involve the patient.
Does that already start that, we are developing trucks, or we identified this need out there? So we asked really, like Thomas, I think you said that, where we really get out there to the patient and ask, is there a need for this drug at all? And if so, what we should develop? Is that where it starts, or does it really start, we have to find, okay, there's a huge market, and now let's go, we study on that, and then we decide that patient-friendly, I would say? Or is it already, does it start much earlier?
Is that to me?
To me?
Well, I think it's a combination of things that have made that happen. Because I think if you look at what's happened with rare and orphan indications, rare diseases, that's become an interesting hot topic. And again, you could argue that historically, from a business perspective, it's not in a pharma company's interest to develop drugs in that compound because there was no money in it. However, because of everything that's changed, it has become a raison d'etre to develop drugs in rare and orphan indications. So that's one factor that has influenced this. I think historically, maybe an industry would have used, pipeline as a driver, whereas now patient need has come into that factor as well, very definitely.
Do you see that too at Lundbeck? Do you guys look really at how and what should we develop? Really identify the patient's need out there?
I think it's a combination, because at Lundbeck we are focused on 4 disease areas: schizophrenia, Parkinson, depression, and Alzheimer's. And of course, sometimes it starts in the lab, right? Because we know, or we're trying to find out what receptors to target, etc. But I also think that, it's in our mindset to really try to help people with these diseases. So that's one end where it starts. But on the other hand, then of course we know that there is a big unmet need. So we're trying to meet that unmet need. And we're looking into that unmet need to try to understand what it is. Because some people may think that, okay, if you develop a drug and it only helps, 1 or 2 points on this and that scale, that's nothing. But it could be everything, right? Because that could mean that a patient can dress themselves. Yeah. And so I think for us it's a combination. And I think, and I know that you will also ask a little bit about this, but there's a lot in it for us as well, right? Because first of all, we want to help the patient. But of course, if we can meet an unmet need, of course, there's a big business opportunity for us as well. And we need to survive as a company. So instead of just developing another Me Too compound, we can develop an exclusive compound that can really make a difference.
Okay. We just said and you especially said there's a paradigm shift. We couldn't talk to the patients, or you couldn't talk to the patients in the early days, and now we really want to have contact with them. We even invite them to conferences to see them and talk to them. Why do you think this is happening? Is it because we also think it's more efficient to do it like this? Instead of giving a protocol to a site and say you do that now, we really try to control it in a better way. Why do you think there is a shift going on?
Well, I think there is a shift also because for the pharma, that is, I think, as you said, a very regulated but also very conservative industry. When we look outside, then we see that the regulators themselves are, I would say, opening the door or the gate in meeting rooms like the FDA, the EMA, or I would say the payers, to involve patient association. Well, we think maybe also there is I would say, a possibility for us to do it. And very often, and I'm just linking that for the clinical operation guys, if you are in the meeting room, like the monitoring, 100% SDV versus risk-based monitoring. Sometimes we have believed that we had to do something, and it's only recently that we discovered that, in fact, there was another way to do. So I think the patient centricity is also because we see that everyone is talking to everyone. So why should we stay aside, I would say, from the communication with the patient?
So I do have a different perspective on this. I think, and I'm gonna be, I think it's an initiative we were forced to take, but and then we gladly took it, But it comes from, something bigger, which is sharing economy, right? So we're seeing users taking control, of certain businesses, right? And I think we had to morph and adapt to that, because people they want control, so they want to be, now patients want to be part of it, as opposed to just rely from their own doctors. So I think it's the ownership, spinning off from sharing economy and behavior is influencing our industry as well, right? So I don't think somebody came, we have to listen to patients. All of a sudden it's like that voice was so loud that we had to hear it,
Do you mean due to new technologies that were upcoming, like the internet?
Sharing economy, people is no longer, users are taking control of services, they're no longer rely on just a black taxi, taking them to somewhere. They want to tell them how they want it, when they want it, and so they want to take control of things, as opposed to rely on a service that is status quo, right?
I would tend to agree. Yes?
What I mentioned, I think 2 or 3 years ago, our regulatory authority said, the payers at the end, the payers said, I want to really know what the patient believes and not what the physician or the industry think what the patient believes, right? So that was something I still think it's more that the regulatory and the payers opened the door, and the pharmaceutical industry felt that this is an opportunity. I mean, looking at the first trial, I think it was GSK about lupus, where they get withdrawal. I mean, they don't get the approval to get on the market, but then the patient organizations start, bringing together data, and GSK decided to say, okay, we follow this with patient-reported outcomes, and they get the drug on the market. So they realized, okay, there's a way to the market without even, with involving the patient. So I'm more in that direction, that just pharma now realize that this is another way to get better on the market, or is another way to get on the market. Maybe it's maybe provocative, but I think it's one of the ways.
I think you're right, Niels, and I think it comes back to what Oriel said. Customer centricity is not new.
Yeah.
Uber have climbed all over it. Starbucks, customer centricity has been around and it's evolving. But again, we're an unusual industry, because if you think about the doctors and the nurses, that in clinical research they're a downstream provider. And then 3 years later, we want the reps to go out and sell the drug to them that we've beaten them over the head for the past 2 years to deliver good data and get patients recruited. So it's an unusual dynamic. We've now even complicated that by adding the patient in as a further downstream provider, because ultimately, and we're a long way off, the idea is to go to trialist studies, direct to patient. That's probably come to that later in the further space. But again, I think it's been forced upon the industry, but in a good way. And the industry, instead of blocking it or being negative, they're saying, well, yeah, there is something in this. We need to do it properly. We need to do it correctly, because everybody who works in clinical trials is very detail and process oriented, and they want to do it right.
And the industry is still very cautious, because if you look for Facebook websites where about a study, they wouldn't allow because of the comments, this and that. So we have this a lot. They want to kind of talk to them, but in a controlled way. That's something we realize a lot in our way we do business.
But when you say it's smooth, it's also because there is reluctance within pharma to move, because some people, and in particular, I would say on the physician side, they feel they are losing, I would say, some of their power, because they were so keen to discuss between their doctor to their doctor within, I would say, pharma and KOL, that now you involve, I would say, people who are not under control, and therefore people are very much sometimes afraid that it may go in a different, I would say, direction than what they were expecting. So it's not so easy, I would say, even an organization to say, okay, let's move to that.
When you're saying people, you mean the physicians?
Physician, or sometimes also management, because people say, okay, fine, if you want to play with it, do it, but it shouldn't take one more day to do it. And therefore, it's true that sometimes it's time-consuming too, but you have to prove, because I heard this morning, or I think this afternoon also, do you have KPI to show that even you do it because it's good to do it, in terms also of, I would say, a good collaboration, you have also to show that, in fact, you get some benefit in terms of, I would say, having less amendments to the protocol, having more patients recruited, and this is taking time to show.
Yeah, I mean, it's profit organizations. So, I mean, it has to pay out somewhere. If you add cost time here, it has to pay out somewhere. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. I mean, that's a game. After we have kind of a picture of what patient centricity could mean and where it comes from. So what is it that you currently do that you could consider patient-centric, activities that you've started, that you're doing? I know you're doing some things I've talking to you before, so why don't you start with you?
Sure. So at least we have decided to do things that are quite easy to do, not costly, and to show that there is indeed a good return on investment in order to gain, I would say, experience, but also to gain motivation from the management. And for example, one thing we are doing at the moment, and I have, for example, the brochure here, is from the National Association Against the Cancer, called in France Ligue contre le Cancer. They have a dedicated group of patients looking to informed consent. And they are very much, I would say, experts in doing it. They review the informed consent before you submit to the ethical committee, and they give the advice within 5 working days. They are very, I would say, professional in the manner they deliver, because that association has understood that if it was taking 3 months to get, I would say, an advice from the patient, it wouldn't work. So we have done it, and we can show that we have far less, I would say, comment from ethical committee. And this is the type of things we try to put in place, that is to say, using small, I would say, actions that can show, I would say, a return on investment. But at the same time, we try also to go a little bit further, but it's taking time. That is to say, for example, involving patients to help us to design a protocol, it's one step beyond, and that's what we are trying to do, but it may take time.
So you're currently starting going more during the through the advocacy groups rather than directly to the patient at this point.
Yeah.
But you want to change that, right? You want to directly go to patients?
Yeah, but it depends also of the disease. If we have the chance to have, I would say, a patient association already organized and well structured, it's maybe easier than going to, I would say, the patient that we don't know. Despite I know there are services we can get from people like you, but at least we try to use what is already in place, and that is well known, I would say, even into the, I would say, the regulatory or ethical committee, I would say, landscape.
Lisa, what are you guys doing in terms of patient centricity?
Well, I'm representing sort of a mid-sized or insightful biotech company, and I agree with you. I was very impressed with all the tools and the initiatives done already. I think from the company where I'm coming from, I think, we really have this in our hearts, in our minds, but perhaps we don't have it all in our hands yet. We don't have all the tools yet. But I think, first of all, every day when I go to office, I'm met by big pictures of patients that we have helped or tried to help, describing their stories. We are inviting patients to talk about their disease. And I think there is a constant, really, a mindset about that patient is really in the center for us. And every time when we have town hall meetings, etc., this is really emphasized. I think this is in our minds and hearts, I think, throughout the company. But when it comes to tools and actions, we are not that advanced yet, but we are doing some things. I mean, we are doing surveys, we are doing social media listening to try to understand what's important for the patients. I'm currently involved in a project within schizophrenia where we are interviewing patients, doing surveys to try to understand the patient journey throughout the trial, try to understand the pain points, and also try to overcome them by some design thinking. What else are we doing? We try to have patient-friendly recruitment initiatives and stuff like that, of course, but we don't have these big fancy apps and web pages yet. But I think there are more and more tools. I think.
I mean, not all of them are proven. I got the sense from oral that it's kind of the experimental phase that you guys going through. There wasn't much data yet there. And this is probably the way it is, The big pharma starts it off, especially, innovative companies, and then let's see what's left when they did it. So you save some money, and you can implement whatever standard of care, standard of this here later on. So I get this. Do you see any output already where you say, okay, this is how we improved? Maybe not even measurable. If measurable, even better. I mean, I guess the audience is interested in that mostly.
And measurable, no, I don't think so from a patient-centric perspective yet. Of course, we're trying to measure recruitment initiatives. But for the project I'm just in, where we're doing this, I mean, we have a lot of output already, and we're now testing our concepts on how we should overcome this hurdle and the pain points, etc. But no, I can't say we have any measures there yet.
If you had to measure, what would you measure?
I think
that goes for all of you. I mean, it's probably, even if you don't have it, if you know what your target is, it's much easier to define which way to go.
I think one way is mentioned, to look at the number of amendments. I mean, if you use the patient input in the protocol design. I think one way is that we're also trying to do in some project, what we're doing patient exit interviews when they exit from a study. We can try to measure that over time, of course, and see if we're improving, how satisfied they are with the studies. That is 2 examples. I don't know if you have more, Tom.
Yeah, well, we're a little bit different from pharma because we're a CRO, and historically our problem has been that a pharma would come to us to see it, the protocol, that's it, carved in stone, you cannot change it. We find that's changing because with one of the many good things with patient centricity is that you get patient insights, burden analysis, site burden analysis, patient burden analysis, that go into a report that helps study teams inform the discussion around endpoints, for example. That's one of the issues with protocols, one of the measures we have. So as well as reducing number of protocol amendments, we've found from different sponsors that there can be anything up to 60% of endpoints that are never used. So there's a cost to that. So then instead of trying to have an internal discussion, if we've got patient insights that say patients really do not want to have this lumbar puncture, they do not want to have this PET scan, they hate it, then instead of it being a subjective decision, the study team can then say, well, actually, we can remove this endpoint from the protocol. We can show this rationale to the regulatory authority to say that patients don't like it, they don't want it. So, and you reduce the cost. So we are finding measures that can be built in this way. And also we've got two arms. We've got a technology arm. So we're looking at the Internet of Things, wearable devices. What are the easy ways to gather data instead of the old difficult ways? It's still early days, and it's tuning all the time. But instead of a nice to have, we are finding we've been asked for this information up front in protocol design to help inform the design of the protocols.
So just sorry again. It's just following on Tom's point. KPIs or ROI, sometimes it's hard to measure because particularly some studies where we apply these are lengthy studies, right? And do you want to, I don't think you can claim a direct ROI just from one study. You have to pull several studies, right? But the most important thing, and it's a short-term KPI, is like, what are you doing with the feedback you're getting from patients, right? Because it's a buzzword. A lot of teams are saying, oh, patient centricity, checkbox. I talk to patients, I engage with the patient advocacy. Okay, but what changes that drove to your protocol, So I think that's very important, because you can just speak to people, but then if you're not going to change your protocol, then you have nothing to measure, right? So I think
that's why I was asking what specifically do you do? Because we hear a lot. I'm not in this industry only for 12 years compared to the other people here. But what I've learned is that we hear a lot, especially in conferences, about this, these early days, this innovative stuff. Most of them we would probably know that don't work out that well, and we never hear about them again, unfortunately. Some things just move their way, and because they're good things to do. But still comes back to my point. What are, talking about what we're going to measure? Not with one study, but let's say 3 or 4. What do you guys think is what we should be measuring? What is the target that we are?
So, and then coming back again to the word feasibility, and then I'm going to pass the micro, so I don't want to hijack this. It's not just increase of performance, it's reliability. So one of the biggest issues we have in big pharma, medium pharma, or pharma in general is that we're not hitting what we're predicting. Therefore, if we overperform, it sounds great, but it's not great because we're also losing, we have, lost some money, that we could dedicate somewhere, so undercosting, overcosting, not good, so we want reliability, so that's, I mean, if we can do it faster, great, but with reliability, so we have to predict we're going to do it faster and we have to hit that target, otherwise it's, so what I'm, experiencing, speaking to other colleagues in feasibility study, optimization, recruitment, the word is no longer give me a lot of patients. It's like, let's make sure we hit what we planned, so reliability, It's not about the speed, it's about making sure that what you plan is realistic and you hit it,
Could I add something? There's also another way of measuring patient centricity. I mean, there is I can't remember the name of the company right now, but they're doing a big survey every year about pharma companies and how patient-friendly they are perceived. And at least I think we as a company are doing something right, because I know that Lundbeck is hitting number 3 there globally, even though it's a small company. So that's another way of measuring it, not only from a clinical trial perspective, but from a company profile perspective. Could be due to the indications and stuff like that, of course, as well. But that's another way of measuring it, asking patients, right?
They're
Yeah, and-
asking patients, or they're asking patients, or asking the pharmaceutical?
No, they're asking
employees?
patients about their perception of different pharma companies.
I think the annual survey, patient view or something like this, on
Yes,
corporate
correct.
reputation of
Yes,
pharma.
yes.
we have seen moves because in this room, ROI, metrics, KPIs, it's what we live and die by really in our industry. And I think everybody agrees that, without very firm baselines or comparators, any ROIs in patient centricity, it is hard to hit. We are seeing variations of that. There's ROE, return on engagement, which is probably a softer measure, a softer set of measures. And it is interesting when you think of it. When you look at the people that sat up here this morning and each told their individual stories, these are people. And if you think how we talk in the back office in pharma design and clinical operations, we're talking in hundreds or thousands of patients. We're talking in, even worse, 0.3 patients per site per month. You try and stack that up against the individuals that sat here. And I think, for me, certainly what I've seen, and also from other CRO colleagues and pharma colleagues in discussion, it's putting a human face to that which wasn't there before, and actually tempers back some of the empirical thing, how we try and drive very hard for that 200 patients, 100 patients, one patient per site per month. It's shifting that mindset to, well, actually, these are people. So our whole approach, when you walk in the door of Lundbeck and Pierre, Fabre and other pharma companies, they're not the only ones. They've got big pictures of patients. That is changing the whole way that we approach clinical trials. Subtly, we're not very quick, but we are moving in the right direction, and it's really good to see.
Very interesting point, actually. I like this with the 0.3% per site per month versus the pictures you were talking about in your hall when you enter the building. It's very good. Let's talk about the future then. What is the next to come? Any ideas? Any thoughts around that?
So the way we see it in my organization is that because we start quite late, we will try to, I would say, cope with the delay. And at the same time, we are doing currently things that are quite easy, that is to say, review of informed consent. We really want to go to some of the box you showed this morning on the AppGen, for example, on target product profile, that is to say, even when we don't have yet, I would say, a product, just to understand what are the expectations of the patient, and to understand really what the needs, in order that we could drive, I would say, even our research people to go to the good point. So that would be more on our side. And the second side, and because I'm advocating myself also for that, is to try to facilitate the educational program, whatever it's coming from pharma or because I'm part of the EUPathy organization. I guess what is missing so far is, if we want to increase, I would say, the level of partnership between patient and pharma, is that we have to give, I would say, the chance to patient associations that are not well organized yet to be able to increase in terms of, I would say, their understanding of what is really the constraint of pharmaceutical development. And through all the educational program we can offer is to try to get people aware. And because this afternoon, when we learn about some of those patients who even never had the idea that they could participate to a clinical trial, I think we have to improve that. And it's not an easy step, because sometimes even patients and patient association doesn't want to deal with pharma. So the way we can, I would say, offer, I would say, training is not so easy, but through, for example, like EUPathy organization and consortium, I would say, it's one step further.
Okay. So how do you see the future in this regard?
I mean, super difficult question. First of all, I was thinking, what do my kids do? Can we find? Oh, then it's musical in Snapchat. Perhaps that's not something for the future. And then I was thinking, perhaps, by putting the patient in the center, and perhaps then putting more and more away of the competitiveness amongst the pharma companies, perhaps some more collaborations. We talked over lunch about, a collaboration such as the EPAD, the European Association for Dementia, where you collaborate companies together to try to find a cure for patients living with Alzheimer's disease. Perhaps that's something we'll see more in the future, like these public-private partnerships. Perhaps using patients more and more. I'm just thinking out loud now. I mean, as advocates for studies, for clinical trials. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. That's the only thing I can think about,
Well, perhaps some of the future is here now at the moment. We mentioned about the cyclist visit. We know that home patient infusion services, telemedicine, wearable technology, that's been around for a few years, and the FDA recognized that. The idea of taking studies directly to patients in their homes, I think that's a long way off. And I think what I'm finding, even with patient centricity, even though we are putting the patient at the center of things, we absolutely have to still involve the doctors and the nurses in the clinics. They are the air traffic controllers of patient care. And actually what we find when we do our patient surveys and our patient insight analysis, we have to actually temper it with what we get back from the nurses and the carers, because the patients may think and know one thing, but you have to take the balanced view. So yes, it's patient-centric, but it's actually always involving the site as well.
Since a couple of months, when I'm talking to others, we may be losing connection with the sites, by the way. I mean, with the physicians. Because they are kind of out of fashion, right? And we're talking about patient centricity, things like that. And we also know that the payers, and everybody's seeing the patient more as a customer, and there's not the, we don't sell to the physician anymore, we sell to the patient. So don't know what happens there, but I have the feeling also that pharmaceutical companies, they have their CRAs usually on the field, and they connect with sites and whatever. I see that this is less and less. I just see one or two companies, pharma companies, that still have the CRAs in connection with the sites, and they really have good work because they have this connection. These are, by the way, companies that never come to us with regards in patient recruitment because they are connected with the site. So I see there's a danger. We should not leave or lose connection with the sites. There must be kind of engagement from the sites as well. Take them maybe with us in this patient centricity discussion and trying to involve them. I think that's something we have to do.
I think that has, if I can comment on that, I think that was the case, a couple of years ago. But when I speak to people, I think actually there's a shift back again towards, more and more companies realizing the benefit of having a direct contact with the sites, because that's really key. So that's what I see when I talk to people, that, they're moving a little bit back to that, so that they have their own local staff in direct contact with the sites. And I totally agree. I think it's a partnership, sites sponsor patients and their families.
And that would be great. I think this should be the target also from my perspective. Patients. So really, like all three stakeholders put that together.
I just have a kind of a provocative question as well, and this picks up on pretty much what all of the panelists have said right now about the connectivity. And, the title of this thing, The Patient's Voice. My challenge to you is, did you hear what they said today? Because not one patient gives a rip about a KPI or an ROI or even an ROE or the branding of these organizations, because did you hear the questions that they asked? They said, Thomas, why aren't all of those countries gray? And you guys have kind of circled around it. It's about creating the expectation, the predictability. But what they're asking for, and you've invited them to tell their stories, and you say you listened, but have we heard them in a way that we can make it practical for how we do the next things in our future? And it's, we play this game. I like how you said it, Lisa, about, let me ask my kids. And at our table, it's always, what's more important, to be listened to or to be heard? And what I think we're missing, and I think that this is really the best forum to start us dealing with the future, is to get the stakeholder groups together so that we can start to actually listen and share a new lexicon, a new vocabulary, because they don't know our world, they don't know the back office, they are not business people. Somebody's asking them how they feel, and you're giving them the opportunity to talk about it. And what we need, I believe, to think, and here again, my last provocation, is that the expectation has to some way morph into giving them hope, so that this is a standard of care, that this is something that's going to be made available to them, that they understand what the implications are, but that they can make these informed choices. Everything that's been said today is absolutely inarguable. Everybody's got the right idea, but I still think we have a gap, and that needs to be done.
Very good point. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Very interesting thoughts. Any more ideas around the future, or then Ariane?
So, and this is going to be quite provocative, because we, both from talking to investigators now, we talk to patients. I think the future is we're going to talk to machines, so that's not so far off.
The machines of the people, hopefully. The machines of the patients.
Machines, Yeah. So, a lot of the, trial and error, You know, we are, you know, like maybe not. It seems very futuristic, but we're not that far. You know?
I think Oriol pointed something very strange out. So we are talking to machines. We never should forget that behind all our data, behind all our systems that we have in place, there's an individual, either an investigator, either a patient, either a CRA. So there are individuals behind, and we should never forget this. It's, I think, the industry. So Pierre, so where I'm coming from, it was paper-based, manual work, and just think about it. Even if we have all these systems in place, it's still manual work. It's still human beings behind brains, communication, fuzzy logic, I will call this, to make conclusions, to get things done. So I think that's the important.
That's where we should go. We should never forget whatever we do. It's real patients. We should once in a while really remind us of that. Probably come to the next patient's voice and talk to them again and meet them and share our vision with them and the other way around. Listen to them. Lisa, thank you very much for your remarks. I liked that a lot too. So with this, I would like to close. Thank you very much for being here on the panel. I think it was very interesting. I think you did a great job. Thank you very much.